Clay, I have a lot of questions about this episode, but what's with the dog? What's with Guinan's dog? Is the dog a product of divorce? Is that what's going on in that scene? Why is she sad to be handing it off to that guy that she calls Uncle Ray or something like that?
I guess you can't take dogs with you if you're leaving the planet.
Is that what it was about?
I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe the dog comes with the bar.
I know why the dog is there is because Patrick Stewart has a hard-on for rescuing pit bulls, and he has to have a dog and everything he does at this point. But I didn't understand, were they an ex-couple? Was that her ex-husband that was showing up to get the dog?
Idea.
I didn't get anything about it. I was hoping they would touch on it because nothing really gets my goat more than trying to use this dog as some kind of stand-in tool for getting the point of their story across.
Well,
but no idea.
most listeners don't realize you briefly went to law school where you majored in dog custody law.
That's right. And this episode doesn't deal with the nuance of that incredibly deep field.
No. See, it knows. This show knows when it's touching a really a deep, nuanced topic, and it just backs off. It really doesn't take a swing for something that maybe it's out of its depth trying to cover. like dog custody.
Dog custody is a terrible, brutal subject. There's a lot of subreddits about men's rights activists talking about their dog rights that aren't being respected in court, which I understand here because that guy didn't get a single line and Guinan was drunken with a shotgun and no one's questioning her parenting ability about that dog. So let's get to this episode, which is called...
Sorry. Is this the second... This is the second episode we've done this week where whether or not a dog likes you is a pivotal plot point.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, because we're doing ex post facto in Voyager.
Yes.
We recorded that earlier. There we go. There's some... If anyone's on the Patreon and not listening to the public feed, you can go listen to the Voyager episodes that we're covering at this point. Let's talk about this episode called Activism, written by Alexandra, what's her name? Ocasio-Cortez, Greta Thunberg, directed by Ibram X. Kendi. In this episode, a bunch of people talk shit about stuff they don't really understand, but it's actually called Watcher. Came out on March 24th, 2022. It's the fourth episode of Star Trek Picard's second season. Teleplay goes to Juliana James and Jane Maggs. Story credit goes to Travis Fickett and Julia James. The names are just getting silly in these things. Directed by Leah Thompson. In universe date, April 12th, 2024. We got 3 days. The after show is called Watcher. In this episode called Watcher, with time running out to save the future, Picard takes matters into his own hands and seeks out an old friend for help. Meanwhile, Rios ends up on the wrong side of the law, and Jurati makes a deal with the Borg Queen. I don't really like these log lines that the Picard show has, but I don't know what else they could really say about this one.
Do you not like them because the log lines are more interesting than the actual show?
They're like a simplified version. Like, it literally explains what happens in the show, but they don't really have anywhere else to go with it.
Right.
I don't know. It's one of those things. Excuse me. What'd you think of Watcher?
I thought this episode was awful. We're 4 episodes into this. Is this the fourth episode?
This is the
fifth
fourth
episode.
Fourth.
This is another episode of our principal cast trying to find each other and not actually doing anything. And I just don't... This just felt like such a waste of time. And also, I usually don't go to bat too hard against shows being capital A, capital S about something. But...
especially Star Trek.
Oh, boy. This is... this is... So, usually when science fiction is used to be quote unquote about something, there's some science fiction involved and not just your principal characters standing around in the present talking about how awful everything is. And I don't
our
like
future,
what's
Clay. It's our future.
It's literally next year. I don't know. I don't know. Like, first of all, I don't even know where to start with this because, like, I think the principal worst part about this is that Guinan is apparently, like every other character on this show, now an angry drunk.
Yes.
Who thinks that 2024 in America is the worst moment in human history, and she's been alive for 1,000 years. Like, come on.
It's awful. It's so terrible.
I know what
she's lived through horrendous things in this planet.
Yeah.
She lived through COVID, which happened a couple of years ago on this planet.
She lived through the First and Second World Wars. She lived through
Civil Rights Movement,
the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement. I don't know how long she's been on Earth, but a lot of terrible shit. Was she around for the Black Plague?
Well,
that
she was here
bad.
we're going to run into questions. She was here with Mark Twain, right, in TNG.
Right, yes.
Yeah, so she's been here for a long time.
And it's just, I don't, like, they're doing a lot of this is the episode that has had the most callbacks to Star Trek 4. And this is, Star Trek 4 is a pretty hip politic, lefty-leaning movie. And I'm not saying that as a negative thing, but it's a movie literally about going back to save the whales, which is such a
green
pop
metaphor.
Yeah, such a pop social cause of the time that it became just like kind of like a joke, essentially. Like it became a punchline.
Yeah.
So it doesn't bother me that they're delving into stuff like that. But Jesus Christ, at least Star Trek 4 had something to say about it and did something fun with it instead of just having Spock and Kirk stand around talking about how much everything sucked.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really hard for me to find much redeeming about this episode. Just from like not even like politically, because I'm not even taking like a stance on the politics of the episode.
Yeah.
It's just poorly done fiction is what it is.
Yeah.
Like it's just standing around saying stuff about like it's the worst kind of ham-fisted. It's not even a metaphor. It's just literalism.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just, I don't really know what you're supposed to come away from this episode.
I didn't like
And that's not even talking about the time travel bullshit, which I have been thinking about the time travel plot all day, and I would like to talk about for a little bit at some point.
We can probably get to it. The second half is probably, I think a good orientation would be the first half to deal with like the substance, and the second half is like the structure of what's going on here. Mm-hmm. Because that's what people are talking about on the Discord mostly. And we can save that for the second part. My excuse me, my thing about this one is that the big issue that these modern Trek shows, and Picard in particular, seems to have is that, like, I don't even really know where to start this. So the characters in this show are written in a way that's like what I consider to be a cardinal sin of writing something, which is that the characters are written in a way that they have no connection to the universe that they're supposed to inhabit, right? So these characters are from the 24th and 25th century, and they are well in the future. When they come back to our time, a nurse comes up to him and says, they're like, "Where's our friend?" And the nurse comes up and she says, "Ice took him away. You're never going to see him again." No one goes, "What the fuck is ice?" Right? Like no one is surprised or like questioning about what the hell is going on in this time, because they're from 300, 400 years in the future. They should have no connection to what's going on here. It would be like you being familiar with like medieval era like feudalism acronyms.
Right.
Like you would have no idea what they're talking about. And here it's just taken for granted because of how preachy and stupid and like profoundly stupid this episode is, that when they go back and they want to make their little political statement about it, the characters don't even react in a reasonable way for the way that they're set up to supposed to be. So all it is just this modern, incredibly progressive, profoundly stupid outlook on complicated issues that is like insulting to you as a viewer, because this is like the most childish, stupid content that I think I've seen in a long time across all of this stuff.
I don't even want to say it's progressive, because I think that's insulting to actual people who hold progressive views.
I think it's progressive activism. I think it's a lot of slogans and a lot of like Twitter stuff.
Yeah. So there's a movie, I'm sure there's more than one, from a couple of years ago, a Kevin Sorbo movie that is
famously
essentially
right-wing actor.
Yes, famously right-wing actor. That is essentially the movie Red Dawn, as if Red Dawn wasn't right-wing enough.
Yep.
But instead of the Russians, it's Antifa mobilizing and like taking over a town in Midwestern Kansas or some shit.
Yes.
It's ludicrous. This is the same amount of ludicrous as that. Like, it has the same amount of understanding of what it's talking about and the position that it's holding. And it's just really, I find it embarrassing for Star Trek that they are covering, not that they're covering this stuff, because sure, you can cover this stuff if you want. Yeah. But the way they've chosen to do it is just bad. It's just bad.
It is embarrassing. I mean, and it's tough because when you talk about this stuff, I always feel that like the discussion is so splintered that if you start complaining about leftist politics, people assume your politics are extreme in the other direction about stuff. And I always feel that that's not the case, but like I would rather watch like a Ted Cruz version of Star Trek than I would watch this trash.
Right.
Like it's just this, it's an ideological, unthinking, slogan-based nonsense show where I'm kind of wrong in that last week I was like, I wonder if they're going to actually touch on any of these subjects. I was surprised that they came back to it so hard, but I'm also kind of right in that I still don't think they're ever going to talk about it, really. You know, they're just going to give you more examples of it. And I think that that's the biggest flaw to me is that the characters there's no charm of Voyage Home here because the characters don't act like Star Trek characters in our own time, being surprised by stuff. No. They act like normal people. I
said it last week or possibly the week before. They need Elnor in this cast to make it in any way charming because everybody else is too cool.
Right.
They all show up in the 21st century. They know how to do everything. They're cooler than that's where the charm comes from is, yeah, they're from an advanced future, but like you said, I'm from an advanced future. If you put me back into the year 1300,
right,
it doesn't help me for shit, you know?
No, you'd have a lot of questions.
I'm still going to get the plague or an axe in the face relatively quickly. It doesn't help me.
Yeah. And I think the other big thing for me is that the show increasingly feels to me as though it's written by an algorithm where the only parameters are you have to fit 55 Star Trek references in a 44-minute episode. Go. And it has no other drive than to do that. And so when I read things like Trek Core's review, which is like ejaculating all over itself because of all the references to stuff that's happened before, I look at it and I go, a good example of this is the punk on the bus, right? Which is a callback to Voyage Home. There are no longer punks who listen to boomboxes on buses. This doesn't happen. This is in Voyage Home. They went to the 80s when this shit happened because punk was a big thing in the 80s in that era, in the Bay Area and stuff like that. Yeah. It made sense that there was a punk on a bus listening to a stereo. It makes no sense except to be this like masturbatory reference that the same actor is here looking exactly the same, except looking fatter. And like it's just so breaking of the reality of the show.
That's a really good example of what's lazy about this show because like that's a fine reference to make. But as it happened, I kind of chuckled for a bit, and then I thought about it, and I was like, "What a fucking! That's the laziest way they could have possibly done that."
They didn't update him,
right? Why don't you have the same guy play like a clean-cut businessman,
right?
Because he's now grown up, and
With
he's
a Bluetooth.
doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing, listening to that song, but he's listening to it on his phone, turned up really loud, because that's something people actually do.
Yeah,
you know, like that. Then you're at least putting a spin on it that's kind of clever, instead of what they did, which is just him being like, "Oh yeah, sorry."
Hasn't changed.
Sorry.
He's the same person. He is not
Oh,
changed.
so double dumbass on me. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's the... I don't feel that the show really respects itself or its content in a way that it attempts to make anything feel realistic. And I think like I'm just drowning in metaphors. Like when Picard is in his chateau and he's talking to she's like, "What happened to your family?" He's like, "Oh, we went to England," which is like kind of a cute joke, but it's like, all right.
Yeah. They answered the largest looming question of all Star Trek, which is, why does Picard have an English accent and a French name?
And they did it in, I don't know, he's talking about the hidden tunnels or whatever. And, you know, the other big example that everyone's been picking on, and then we can go to something else, is just that what is the level of coincidence that Guinan works at various 10 forwards before
It's the same place. It's the same place. It's the same fucking bar. It's been there for 300 years.
Yes. Yeah. But and then so it's more a coincidence that she ends up on a starship that has a bar in its 10th deck on the forward part of the ship than it is the other way around, that she named the bar after her experience there or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Bizarre.
Like, yeah. Yes.
What did you think of this Guinan, this version of Guinan? I thought it was terrible. I thought they took one of my most beloved characters and just shot her in the face, basically.
Yeah, I didn't like it. I didn't like it for a number of reasons. She's just... I can't really talk about that without getting into some of the time travel stuff. But
Sure.
I thought the actress was pretty good. Like, I thought she kind of had she sounded like Whoopi a bit.
Yeah, she's fine.
I was trying to think, like, why didn't they just do? Well, I mean, you can only do so much of that de-aging stuff before you get Brent Spinered by it all.
Yes,
but I have a theory that the reason that they so blatantly, that's not the right word, but gratuitously recast Guinan is that she's going to show up in one of the other shows.
One of the other Star Trek shows.
Yeah, in Strange New Worlds or something.
Oh, as a younger version of herself, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't, you know, I don't know. Like I said, if she's 1,000 years old and from a different fucking planet and she has zero perspective.
Yes.
On anything.
Her society got wiped out by the Borg. That was not the worst thing that's ever
Right. And I mean, like, you know, even as far as humanity goes, she was around in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. She knows objectively that it's better than it was then.
That's not true. Whatever happens in 2024 is going to be bad. That's my argument against, like, you know, progressive politics or whatever. But this thing that's infected progressive politics, which is that, like, now is the worst time that's ever happened, is absurd on its face. It's just like, yes, you can talk about problems that need to be fixed and things aren't always fair and things aren't always good, and there's solutions to problems that have been minimized in a huge way since the 60s and the 50s and then before that and everything. But to just make that claim is absurd. It, like, you see it insinuated, but to see a character actually voice that opinion, it makes them seem like they're deranged. There's no reality there. And I guess what the problem is that I'm not sure what the reality is anymore, because the more people are talking on Discord about the time shenanigans here, the less I understand as to why we're making all these jumps that are happening when I think it's undermining the narrative, really. So if you wanted to get into your take about the time travel stuff, and then we can kind of finish off with random other topics. But, like, I guess my point about the time travel is that I feel like they're jumping too much, and it's making me lose track of where we are and what is supposed to matter and what's supposed to be happening.
Yes. Yeah. They're doing too much stuff and it's too complicated. And kind of, so segueing into the time travel stuff, the big thing that everybody's pointing out is that Guinan should know Picard at this point because they interacted in Time's Arrow, right?
Right, and the time divergence has not happened yet.
Yes. And the apparent explanation for why she doesn't know him, I have another thought about that, which I don't like, but the apparent explanation for why she doesn't know him is that because they are in the 2024 of the alternate timeline in which we eventually turn into the Confederation, so Picard never would have gone back to the 1800s to meet her.
Right. That's what the showrunners' argument is.
Did they explicitly say that? Did that come directly from the showrunners?
He has a quote on Trek Core about it.
Okay.
I can, if you want to go, I'll look it up and I can tell you exactly what he said.
Okay. I was thinking, so I'm trying to make sense of this because by Back to the Future 2 logic, that doesn't make any sense.
There you go. Sorry, do you want this here?
Yeah, hit me with the full quote.
Terry Matalas is the showrunner currently. He says, this Guinan wouldn't remember Picard because in this alternate timeline, the TNG episode Time's Arrow never happened. Because there was no Federation, those events did not play out the same. No previous relationship exists. However, she was likely traveling to Earth, and as we know, she hung around a bit. So this Guinan is different, but she, of course, can sense something is off. She's going through a kind of time sickness thanks to Q's meddling with the timeline.
Okay, so if we are to believe that, right, what is the end game for this story? Because in saying that, that means that the future never happens. So how can you fix a future that doesn't happen?
So, yeah, if we can reset this, what I think the problem is that they're using the word divergence to explain the split that happens. And a divergence implies that there are two paths coming off of you, right? So the moment is the moment that our single timeline splits into multiple timelines at that point.
Right.
What the show is saying is that when Picard jumped from the prime timeline into the alternate future, the alternate version of like the Confederation,
yep,
he was not going into an alternate parallel timeline. The original timeline is essentially destroyed at that point.
Right.
And so instead of showing that in a Yesterday's Enterprise way where the present becomes the alternate timeline, they've given us this implication that there are now multiple timelines running, but apparently there's only one. And by going back before the divergence, everything has been changed in this timeline, even though the timeline should, in my mind, be the same until the point in time where the split happens.
Yes. Because, if you're going by Back to the Future 2 logic, right, you've got Marty goes to the future from 1985. Future Biff steals the almanac and travels back to 1955, which changes his future.
Yep.
Marty returns to 1985, finding that his present has turned into a dystopia, so Marty has to travel back before the timeline split to stop the timeline split. But in doing that, Marty still witnesses the events of the first movie, which still happened because they occurred before the timeline split.
Right.
So that tracks. What's going on here seems to be, I've been thinking about this, and so my conclusion is that it's not a timeline thing. It's a lateral move from Q. So it's basically a separate, as you're saying, it's kind of like a completely separate universe, if you will. I guess it would have. It's not really a timeline. It's more of like a universe.
Yes.
But what it implies to me is that Picard in the past, his actions actually caused the split, and it's somehow related to the Stargazer stuff. So basically, like, my current working theory is that part of stopping the split is sending like Jurati / the Borg Queen into the future to complete their thing.
Yeah.
And when Picard blew everything up, he stopped that from happening, thus creating this new timeline, if that makes sense.
So
basically,
does that become the divergence that Q was talking about?
Yeah, it's like a double divergence, sort of. So like the moment. So essentially, if we're looking at it from 2024's point of view,
yeah,
whatever they're doing to stop the divergence is going to need to involve sending Jurati or the Borg into the future,
right,
to complete the thing. And since she isn't allowed to complete the circuit because Picard blows everything up, their plan in the past fails, and so the divergence happens, and it turns into the alternate, the evil timeline.
That would make sense.
But even
because
it's like
Jurati could just tell them when she shows up as the Borg Queen not to do something, and then that seems in line with like the writing of the show, really.
Yeah, but it's just like logically, I'm trying to figure out how this all tracks because, like, it feels like they're doing a sort of all good things riff where ultimately Picard has to find out that he is the person causing the rift somehow, because otherwise I don't know what they're trying to stop and how stopping that would save the future.
Right.
You know what I mean? This all gets really jumbled, and which is why I don't like that they're doing this, because if you have to have your showrunner put out a statement explaining why these characters don't know each other,
yeah,
I feel like you're not doing something right. Because either way, the other half of that I hate is that regardless, when he comes into 10 Forward, he should react as though Guinan knows him. He should be like, Guinan, remember? I know it's been a long time, but Elorians have long memories. The last time we saw each other was in 1885 or whatever. And then she's like, I don't know who you are, guy, get out of there here. And he's like, oh, gee. Like, he should come to that realization.
But the question, does the character of Picard know what has happened to the timelines in a way that we did not realize this happened? Or the universes? You know what I mean? Is the character of Picard written with the point of view of the showrunner here, where Picard recognizes that this is not the Guinan he knew?
I don't know. I don't think it matters because, like, eventually he says, I'm from the future, 400 years in the future. We're going to be really good friends one day. It's like, okay, well, that timeline won't happen regardless at this point. You know, you've already fucked things up.
Right.
Like, why are you worried about butterfly effect stuff if the future is now completely unwritten? And like the only thing that you could do, I would try to change. It would be like Homer in the goes back in time thing where he just starts smashing everything in the dinosaur, just trying to get back to the right future. Because like if you don't fuck with everything, then it's going to turn into the dystopian future anyway. Like I just think that the goal here is very unclear as to. It seems simple when they're like, oh, we have to stop the divergence, but 4 episodes in, I have no idea what that means. They seem to not really fucking care about it because they're doing all sorts of other shit.
Yeah.
It's just really hard for me to grasp onto something and like really care about this. And the muddled, overly complex time travel mechanic that no one has really ever explained makes it that much more difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree that I think that the time travel is muddled. To me, the biggest issue is just that initial jump from our prime universe into the alternate universe, which at that point is not alternate, it is the universe that they're living in. And by having them jump to it, it makes it seem unclear as to where you are and whether or not their goal is just to get back to the prime timeline, or if they're trying to actually like save another universe from happening.
Right.
And calling it a divergence is bad, right? It's not a divergence. It's a switch or something at that point. It's not a slight change in one direction. I don't know. The reason it hangs me up is I don't know if I find it in some ways to be a distraction, really. Mm-hmm. Like I understand people want to talk about it and it's frustrating and sort of silly and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And on a plot level, it's fascinating and how confusing it can be. But I feel that these shows focus so hard on this stuff that it eventually, A, never really makes much sense, and B, everything else is cast aside to try to make you think that they're clever for this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I get hung up on the first 95% of this episode is characters running around saying nonsense and having sort of nonsense sequences with each other and not getting anywhere. There's no ground that's being gained. I'm not sure.
Right.
Like maybe the most interesting thing that happens is the Borg Queen and Jurati, but I'm not even like even on a successful thing in that it's maintaining my interest, like the Borg Queen and Jurati. Unless if the show. The only reason why it seems that Jurati is a match for the Borg Queen and that assimilation means something to her is that the show has to explicitly come out and tell me that she's lonely. The show never hints at loneliness, right? It's just like the Queen goes, "You're a very lonely character." She says, "I am lonely." And the Queen goes, "Well, you know what's not lonely? The Borg." And she goes, "Oh, that's interesting. I would like to not be lonely." But there's never been a scene of Jurati being lonely, you know? There's no time for that stuff. And
I mean, she does spend half the episode by herself.
But it's not. It's like if they had not said that, I wouldn't call her lonely. I would call her awkward more than anything. Right?
Sure,
like there's a difference there, and she's got her friends close by and stuff like that. It just strikes me as weird. But I still think that's the most successful version or story because I don't really care about what Rios is going through. I think the Rios character is kind of a fun character, but I don't care for this ICE storyline. I don't care for Seven and Rafi saying some of the worst fucking dialogue I've ever heard as they're driving around in a police car.
Can we talk about that police car thing for a minute? Because as it was happening, I was thinking to myself, why are they driving like this? They are shooting this as though they are being chased, and they are not being chased by anybody.
They're going down a one-way
it's a car chase with nobody chasing them.
Yeah.
I think I feel like they must have realized how it played as they were cutting it together or something, because I think there's an ADR radio thing that comes in and it's like police car seen driving the wrong way, like implying that there are other cars now after them,
right?
But you don't see any of them, and so you've got them, you know, it's like if you're watching two people on stage doing a script reading of a car chase scene, and it's like just there are two people in the car going wah, wah, but there's no other cars because obviously you're watching on stage. But it's just they're just
terrible.
Shouting bullshit, and it's what's his name? Rios was an hour away when they started, and they managed to get there in like 15 minutes. Like there's so much stuff like that. Like the thing that sums up this whole episode for me is during that car chase sequence, Rafi gets in contact with Jurati, and she says, "Where's Picard?" And Jurati goes, "I don't know," and then changes the subject. She just teleported him to exact coordinates 3 minutes ago.
Yeah. She knows exactly where he is.
She knows exactly where he is.
Yeah.
And unless she's doing that as a smokescreen because she's influenced by the Queen or something, but they didn't make that clear, so I'm going to say that's not what's happening. It just seems like really cliched action scene writing that isn't really taking into account what the actual action is.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think that's like the fundamental. There's just a deep disconnect between what the characters do and what I'm supposed to think is the motivation for them to do it in the show, and I don't really understand why anybody does any of the things that they're trying to do.
Someone else on the Discord pointed out that Jurati managed to teleport 4 of the crew members from France to downtown LA with pretty good accuracy.
Yeah.
But they don't have enough power to get the radio working. So they can talk to each other.
Or the heater. I think they say the heater is not working in the opening bits or something like that. Yep. We did learn.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we learned that home in the second episode, which they couldn't show us for some reason, is they landed in France. And they just couldn't tell us that for whatever reason in the earlier episode.
But it's important that they landed there because the number 15 is everywhere, and that Jesus fucking.
Do you want to talk about that?
When she starts saying, when he starts pointing out the number 15, and they're like, "What could it mean?" And she's like, "I don't know, 15 hours." And he's like, "No,
it's too vague.
That's too vague. Maybe it's 15 the date. Yes, much more specific. What the fuck, guys?
It's it's too fake. It is brilliant writing there. I was actually, it's a small tangent, but there's a band that I've gotten into very hard recently, and I think is one of my favorite bands. But I only learned about them recently. is Wire, and they have a song called "The 15th," and I was thinking of the podcast. I was like, well, I'm going to open this with a little joke about like, Clay, this episode kind of sucked, but they talked about the 15th, which is a great song. I'd like to rather talk about that. But then I spent the day listening to the album and the song is actually appropriate for Picard in a weird way, because it's about sort of working yourselves into thinking something is real, but then when you actually look at it, it's not real at all. And it was a weird. Anyway, I'll probably play the song out at the end of this episode, but I thought it was a neat little connection to it. And if I have anything to say about this episode, is that once I started thinking about the 15th, I started thinking about other things outside of this episode, and it made me the positives from this episode are not related to this episode, but the things I was thinking outside of it. So it made me think about, just to bring it back to where we were at the start, coincidentally, because the band is Wire, I started thinking about the HBO show Wire by David Simon. And I just think that there's a huge difference there where I know that The Wire is one of the greatest TV shows of all time and heralded and everything, and Star Trek Picard is most certainly not. Even some of the best Star Trek is not anywhere near what The Wire is. But David Simon has politics. David Simon is on Twitter, and you can follow him. You can read his things that he's written, and you can understand his personal politics. The Wire is appealing to any political stripe of person watching, right? David Simon has a point of view, but his creative arts and his writing does a better job of showing a reality that every political stripe will accept as a kind of reality, and you can learn something from it. And you can either agree with it, or you can disagree, or you can think that there's something interesting about the way that it's put here, or you can see a flaw. Two people of different political opinions can see the same scene in The Wire and view it differently from what it is, but it never feels like it's not real in that universe. And I think that that's why it's such a successful show. Star Trek Picard is the opposite of that. And it's why the writing is so terrible in this show, is because it does not build a real universe. It's not trying to do that. It's not trying to have a reality where there was that video on the Discord, The Little Platoon, I think is the YouTube channel. He made a good video about how old Star Trek, when it did politics, it usually just embraced a sort of common humanity aspect of it. It wasn't like this explicit political thing. You know, they're not bringing on like Nixon or something to guest star on an episode. It was about in that TOS episode where there's the black and white face guys, and it's about bigotry and stuff like that based on the color of your skin. It made the common point that it's silly to do that, and it shows how racism and sort of like a prejudice based on color of skin is kind of a nonsensical thing by extrapolating it to a Star Trek universe. And the Wire does the same thing. It assumes that the viewer is intelligent and kind of track what they want to do, and they don't have to explicitly make a point about something. This show, written by Pulitzer Prize winners and Oscar winners, is so fucking stupid. It's stupid. Yeah. It's just astoundingly stupid. And I think that little Platoon video is actually kind of dead on, in that they've changed their goal to become more of an explicit mouthpiece for something, instead of trying to embrace a human values thing, which is what Star Trek kind of used to believe in more than specific politics.
Yeah, it's, and I mean, at its best, really, not only does it play things on a more humanist level, but it does push back on certain things. Like, that's what's so appealing about Deep Space Nine, is that it is a direct reaction to this idea of this utopian future, right?
Yeah.
And it's really pressing on that and putting certain elements of that idea to the test in ways that are not always pleasant for the people involved or even for the viewer in some cases. And that's what is severely missing from this, because the show is too concerned with their characters being right.
Yeah.
And looking cool. Like the most depth, I was joking about it before, but it's really kind of true. The most depth and like grit that these characters on these shows have is that they drink a lot and they don't have sleeves. Like the scene where he goes to meet, where Picard meets Guinan is like almost exactly the same as the scene in the first season where he goes to meet Raffi, where she's sitting, getting drunk, smoking shit, and she's not wearing sleeves. And I mean, honestly, I wouldn't put sleeves on that woman either. The new Guinan is fucking jacked. Right? She should show off her arms all the time.
So be body slamming Q in no time, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, take the Rios stuff, right? What is anyone learning from any of this? The character of Rios is learning nothing. Like, he does not come into... Think of the first 2 episodes as a really long cold open for the show, right?
Yep.
Traditionally, that's where you kind of plant the seeds of what the show is going to be about, and you take a character who has a certain point of view, and you put him to a situation where that point of view is challenged.
Right.
Rios has no point of view whatsoever, and he's being put into this situation only to show the audience that, oh, immigration laws are bad.
Yeah.
He's not learning anything from this. It's not like he's brought nothing into this to learn or change from this story. He is just being a part of it. And I'm sure, at the end it'll be like, well, people are people no matter where they are. It's like, yeah, obviously, sure. But like your character is not changing or learning from any of this stuff. You're just putting him through these paces so you can put him through these specific paces to tell this specific point of view story. It's the writer's point of view. It's not the character's point of view.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing from any of this stuff. Like, you can talk about any of this stuff as you want, but they're not telling a story with it. They're just turning it into a laughing stock. Frankly.
Yeah. I guess the other confusing to me is that they didn't even specifically choose one social issue, right? They're just shotgunning literally everything. It's like climate change, immigration policy, this like it's just the struggle of racism and stuff like that.
The other thing to think about, which I don't think this is part of the problem of going back to 2 years into our future.
Yeah.
It doesn't leave you any wiggle room to speculate. So, like, when you've got these ICE agents who may as well be the Germans from Hogan's Heroes and how over the top they are portrayed.
They're extremely Gestapo in this. Yeah.
I don't know.
Sorry, can I just before you go into it, and this is also a point that goes into what I was talking before about no one asks what ICE is. I've had multiple foreign listeners ask me what ICE is because this is an American idea, right? This is an American thing. It stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, if people are curious, but it's basically our border patrol, like our national border patrol. And that's just like, if you have humans watching the show that are unsure of what ICE is, the characters in the show are definitely unsure of what's going on,
Yes. But yeah, my point was that when you're portraying these characters as such over-the-top villains, the fact that we're in 2024, I don't know if they are trying to portray these things as how they feel they are in 2024.
Oh yeah, good point.
Or if this is a intentionally heightened version of this is the 2024 of the show.
It's going to change so drastically. Yeah, I know.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if because everything is so similar. Like, it's just today, Except it's like 2 years from now, and they've got different people running for president.
They're going to end this with Trump is going to win an election. You know, it's like I wouldn't be shocked if they have that. There's some sort of like election or something that happens at this point. I mean, I'm only semi joking, but I think they're. That's like a patron brought up the point. Would you agree? And I was wondering about it. Like, did they just choose this to avoid COVID? Because what this does to me is that when I read that comment that they basically have pushed this back 2 years so that no one is wearing masks and it's not strange, at that point, it left me wondering, how much is this reality supposed to mirror human Earth reality? Because it can't. Right. Because in the Star Trek timeline, we've already had like the Third World War and everything like that. So it
has that happened? I thought that didn't happen.
That's
for
later.
Like
the eugenics has happened already.
Yeah, eugenics has happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Third World War is coming, and things should be in rough shape for that. But I understand the rationale to say that it's to avoid the pandemic, but I think that we're in such well-worn territory in the timeline that you can assume that the Star Trek reality is no longer our reality, right? Because
that's
it's
the
too
thing.
different.
I don't know, because they are not portraying 2024 as anything other than our reality just slightly heightened, which is which is what my point is. Where it's like if you're that close to the time where the show is airing, I don't know if you are speculating and intentionally going over the top, or if like you are making a comment on things happening now in a way that feels very short-sighted and not really thought out.
Right. So you're giving yourself no time for this change to happen either. You know, it's just like in the next year, things are going to get pretty bad. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, hey, if they are speculating, I mean, it's really pretty a damning indictment of the Biden administration if under Biden ICE turns into literal Nazis, I guess. But I wish they had made an attempt to contextualize it in the world of Star Trek a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because everything just looks so normal. And like you're saying, people who know are like, wait a minute. The eugenics wars have happened. Shit doesn't look like it does now in 2024. Other stuff has happened. The Third World War is 20 years away. You've got the camps happening in San Francisco or whatever. Like that stuff should have happened and is happening, but they're not really dealing with that. So anybody who doesn't know that is just reading this as, oh, it's just 2024, as though it was 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And so it makes me wonder who this is for at that point.
Yep. A constant problem with these new shows between the references and the plotting and everything like that. I find 2024 to be extremely distracting. To have these characters walking around in LA is extremely bizarre to me.
Yes.
It really doesn't feel right. Like, you know, when in DS9's past tense, which is what all these tent cities are referencing here, there's like signs for sanctuary cities. That's the one where they go back in time to the Bell riots and stuff like that. That still felt like a set, and it didn't feel like it was reality. You know, it didn't feel like it was a modern sense of it. It felt like it was an exaggerated version of what these tent cities were coming up with. And you know, I was wondering how much I could complain about this, because here the tent stuff seems willfully naive to me about what like the reality of those situations are. And I was wondering how unfair it was to say that DS9 did it better. But looking back, DS9 played it off as more of a parable about the wealth, like unfairness, like distribution of wealth type of argument, that there were haves and have-nots and stuff like that. The problem, as you're saying, is that the Picard series is so mired and so stuck in our current reality. Those tent cities in present day are not about haves and have-nots. Those are they're open-air drug markets that we basically allow to exist in this world. And it's like, people need help and stuff, yes, but the reason that those things exist is because of this whole sort of mentality of that, like, you can't tell people what to do, and it's not fair to treat people that way or whatever. But it's not the DS9 parable anymore. So it comes across as they're lecturing us about this as like incredibly just out of touch, and it's not a fable anymore. There's nothing to learn. It's just they're just politically wrong about what they're talking about, and they're not even trying to really examine anything at all to sort of prove the character is right or wrong or anything, or make an argument.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And like Deep Space Nine had the benefit of saying that it was 15 years or so in the future. 20 years or so in the future from the point where the show is coming
Right.
out.
It was a distance.
Plenty of, yeah, which you don't have here. Like it does show me a little bit that they have maybe thought about what there is to do, and they're really threading needles in existing canon spaces at this point, because it's like, okay, we need to send them back in time. We can't send them. It would be too expensive to send them back to like 2090.
Yeah,
because we'd have to fabricate as much as we would have to fabricate if it was just the regular show. But we can't really send them back to like 2050 because that's in the middle of the Third World War.
Right.
Which isn't, it would honestly probably be more interesting if they had done that. And honestly, more timely, frankly.
Yep.
So you have to pick a point where to send them back to, and it's like, well, anything before like 2019 turns into a period piece, and that's expensive. So.
Picard logs onto Facebook for the first time or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I would have sent them back to 1985 or something. But it's just they end up being strapped into this literalization of the not too distant future, which is literally 2 years from now.
Yep.
And it's like, this show is not going to age at all.
No. It already seems old because they produced it a couple months ago and stuff has already changed. It's
right.
So rapid. Last point about it, I guess, is that.
Sorry, one last thing about this.
Sure.
Going back to the Future Part 2. The thing that's interesting is that the future of Back to the Future Part 2 is not the 2015 that we live in. It is the 2015 if it just continued to stay 1985 for 30 years.
Sure.
Like that's, so you end up getting that. So the 1985 aesthetic is still there, but it's just jacked up, and all the references are from 1985, but they're all just jacked up. Obviously, that kind of thing. That makes it difficult in this situation to do, because if the 2024 is just 2021 or 2022 of the show, my eyes are going cross-eyed at this point, but it was a bad idea to send them back to this point in time. That's all I'm going to say.
It is. It's a strange. It's got to be budgetary, right? Like they are just trying to thread that needle of chronology that you can to their detriment.
It honestly wouldn't bother me as much if there was more story to it.
No, yeah,
and like if there was more. If the characters that you sent back are being directly affected in a way where 2024 is presenting them with a situation and a point of view that is different than their own, other than just, man, this place is terrible.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's kind of I might be losing myself here. Like was this an Enterprise problem? I'm trying to remember. I feel that in a better written show, the characters would have different points of view about this time. And it's what we liked about the last episode, where Seven likes this period because no one thinks that she's a freak or is scary as a Borg. That's gone. And yeah, there's no difference of opinion amongst anybody. Right. And like Q is off there doing a difference of opinion, but Q is still so useless and mysterious that it's unclear as to what exactly is going on with that or where that matters. I guess we can wrap up with Q, because Q is the last thing that you see. Well, and there's the Picard meets the Watcher or whatever, which is someone who looks like Laris. Takes him through a door, and then we'll see what that is. And then there's Q at the very end. I don't really know what I have to like. He's clear. He's ill. Is the breakdown there? Something's going wrong. His snaps are unintentionally off. I was wondering at that. I think I don't know if I mentioned it in the podcast, but his snaps have seemed off. Yeah. And I like Q as a character. They've done 4 episodes now where he basically just speaks in riddles, and this was not really a trait of his for, like he would speak like this, but there has to be a point eventually. The only thing that I'll throw it to you is that apparently that flashback is before Picard arrives on Earth. Did you realize that?
No. How could you possibly have known that?
You can see the date on the newspaper.
Nobody's paying attention to that.
I know, but like that's what's weird about this show. It pays attention to weird small things like that. So that scene is apparently based on the date of the newspaper happening before Picard arrives back in the timeline. So it's a flashback, basically.
Okay.
It doesn't mean anything to me at this point. I'm just.
Do you know who the girl is that he was watching?
No one seems to know. The book is a Dixon Hill book written by an old TNG writer.
She is listed in the credits as Renee Picard.
Okay.
Who is apparently, I guess she was mentioned abstractly in the first episode where Picard talks about ancestors of his being influential in the creation of the first, Soul mission or Europa
I don't know what that building that she's outside of is the building named after the guy who invents the Nomad probe, which is a TOS thing, which is like an AI probe that goes out into deep space.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing else there. Like there's really nothing to talk about, but she's an ancestor of Picard's is the point there.
Yeah. And apparently Q has some really deep-seated hatred of her because he's really spitting some angry metaphors at her, and I'm not really sure what's going on.
Is he? I viewed it as he was seeing her as Picard essentially, and he's ranting about Picard to her.
Oh yeah, sure, maybe.
But they've gone so long without explaining what Q's upset about or what he thinks Picard has done, and Picard in the show has never thought it worthwhile to ask Q, why are you so mad at me and what do you keep claiming that I've done to this point?
It's a penance, Wes. What else do you need to know?
It's a penance. Ghost Rider's greatest power.
Yes, that's true.
The penance stare was
that would make this show better if Ghost Rider showed up.
Is that the most exciting power for a comic artist to have? The stare?
Actually, it's not as silly as you'd think because it does allow a lot of really kind of surrealistic drawing when you're visualizing that stuff.
Yeah,
so
you can really go crazy with it. Yeah. But he doesn't shoot light. He doesn't shoot beams out of his eyes or anything. He just stares at you, I think. And makes
he just kind of stares at you, and then you basically
relive all the hurt you've caused or something. Right?
Yes. Much like Tom Paris, maybe they just gave him the penance stare in that episode of that we just covered. I didn't realize this was going to be so timely when we covered that the other day. But.
Yeah, I guess maybe the production team knew that this was happening and they wanted to time it out for that Voyager episode ex post facto.
Yeah.
I guess we're done. Did you have any other final thoughts about this one? I thought this is one of the stupidest episodes of the show this season. This is the point in our Patreon coverage where I start to wonder about the ethics of covering this show and charge people for it. I'm glad people like our coverage, but it's so... and I know that people aren't particularly shocked when we go negative on it because this does seem to be the skew of how these modern shows go, but it is like... I look at it just going like, guys, I'm sorry the show is so bad, and I'm sorry the podcast evolves into us going like, what the hell is going on? But seriously, like, what the hell is going on with the show?
Yeah. It's just really frustrating because I feel like the show, it's a symptom of all modern shows, not just Star Trek, but I feel like these Star Trek shows in particular think they're a lot smarter than they are.
Mm.
And especially when it comes to quote unquote mystery that they put into these things.
Yeah.
Like,
it's not even mystery. They just don't tell you the info.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah.
It's not a mystery if all they're doing is presenting you with images and situations that you have no frame of reference to understand what they are in the first place.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it just, if there was something that was more directly driving all of this, I think it wouldn't be as bad. And I think if the heavy-handedness of the commentary they're doing actually meant something to the characters, maybe it wouldn't be as bad. But as it stands, it's just, man, I don't know.
Yeah, I could deal with the bad political takes if it was grounded in a story that Picard, or Rios meets a immigrant child or something. There's a way to add a little bit of pathos to this stuff, and it's just it doesn't come across here.
Like at this point, how many episodes is this? 10?
10, yeah.
10? We're almost halfway through the show, and the cliffhanger they left us on in this episode is, how are Raffi and 7 of 9 going to get Rios off a bus headed to Mexico?
Yep. That's what I come to Star Trek for.
Why isn't one of those characters going, I'm sorry, we have a limited amount of time to do this thing. We have to leave him. At least there's a point of view that they turns into a conflict instead of, what are they there for? Yeah. Why isn't, I feel like, why is Raffi, of all people, after the display that she put on in episode 2 or episode 3, why is she wasting time going to get Rios instead of driving only towards fixing the timeline to bring Elnor back?
Yeah. That's true. Raffi's a little bit odd. Do a quick, actually, we won't have time for that. I'll go out with this final question to you. When they're making these shows, do you think the priority when they're breaking these stories is to drive internet speculation? Is that like...
yes. I think it's big. It's baked into it, yeah.
So that they consciously sit there in the room and go, how can we make this so that people will chatter about this for the next week?
It wouldn't surprise me at all.
It really seems like the main driver of this stuff. And that's what's kind of upsetting to me, is that it does work. It's like an effective troll job to generate chatter about your show. And sorry, go ahead. No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's such like a dark reflection of what television used to be. And I don't mean this to sound like, I'm an old man or something, but it very much feels like almost a sci-fi take on what weekly television turned into, where it went from...
It's a good Dark Mirror episode, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. People watched a show, people liked a show, people talked about a show. Great. Now the talking about the show is more valuable to the people who make the show than people actually watching the show.
Yes.
So the shows are being crafted to make people talk about them, regardless of whether or not the show itself is any good.
Right, and not talk about something important. Just talk about whether or not the timeline makes sense. It's like there's no people don't walk away from this going like, my God, I really have things to talk about with the way that we're handling our immigration policy. You come away going, why is this not the right Guinan? Why is that?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not quality conversations people are having here. It's like it's conversations about why new shows don't line up with 30-year-old shows.
Yeah.
And it's and somehow that translates into success for the people who make these things. I don't know why.
Final thing about Guinan before we go. She has a shotgun in this, right? And the shotgun is one of those things that really irritates me, because when you say this is strange that Guinan has a shotgun and is pointing it at Picard, some Trek fan is going to go, well, there's that episode in TNG where the bar starts breaking out into a fight because everyone's under the mental control of aliens, and Guinan pulls a huge space rifle out from underneath the bar, right? Which does happen. And I always find that very unfortunate, because that to me is the same thing as the punk here, where the show doesn't really seem to understand that it's kind of a joke in the original, and playing it deathly serious here is really odd. And it's odd.
Do you think that's a direct callback to that?
I would have to assume that it is. That's the only reason why I can understand that Guinan has a shotgun in her bar.
Well, I mean, I just assumed it's more of a cliche. The barkeep has a bat or a shotgun or something behind the bar.
That's why I think it's a joke in TNG, because in the future, Guinan has a shotgun under the bar. Basically, I'm going to give them some props and say they're probably making a reference there, because they referenced literally everything else in this show. It's algorithmically driven to generate content and make references. That's what this does. So that my only point is that it tears me up because it isn't like that character has done stuff like that before, but it doesn't really excuse how stupid it is in this show.
Yeah. No, I would agree. Yeah.
That's it. We're done with Picard. The next episode is back. I think it's called To the Stars or something like that. I don't know. Only some sites ever tend to list the next episodes. But thanks everybody for listening. Hope you enjoyed the content today. We'll be covering the rest of Picard and Strange New Worlds. Thanks for all the generous support. Thanks for listening to the Batman episode.
Please, Star Trek gods, please let that show not be dog shit.
It's got to be better than this, right?
I hope so.
I don't know. We'll see. Strange New Worlds. We'll give it a whirl anyway. I think Strange New Worlds is only 10 episodes too, and we're already halfway through Picard.
Do you know what they should start doing? Like, we're talking about crafting these shows for generating conversation online versus actually generating actual quality content. They should just start recasting all the original characters and then just only have them show up as background extras.
Yeah.
Because, like, oh my God, they recast Captain Kirk. Everybody talks about it for 2 months. And so you get traffic driving towards the show. But, like, why do we need Captain Kirk in this show?
Right.
I would prefer to not have Captain Kirk in the show. So why don't you just do it for the clicks? Actually recast him, and then, oh, here he goes. He walks by. Hey, Kirk. See ya.
Yeah, just have, I noticed that Denise Crosby is in Mad Men second season in a very, very small role. She has like 2 lines worth of dialogue, and but I think that they could just add her into this. Just have her be like the grocery checkout person, you know, and everyone will go what does that mean?
Yeah, seriously, yeah. She kind of looks Romulan there. It's
How
like
many
I was
timelines
saying,
are we dealing with at this point?
Yeah, it's like I was saying last week. They should have just gone all into it and had the past that he goes into be a what the fuck is the Deep Space Nine thing? A Benny Russell situation where all of the actors from TNG show up as just normal people.
I would love it.
It would be great.
I hope Avery Brooks knows better. He's not coming back to this. I know people were thinking that or expecting it'll happen. I'll be very sad.
If Avery Brooks shows up in this show, I don't know how I will handle it, because on the one hand, I will be very excited to see what kind of batshit crazy performance he gives.
Yeah, it'll be A+.
But on the other hand, what is he got to buy a boat or something? Like, what he's got to have better sense than to. I wouldn't show up for a Picard show. You kidding me? I would say you give me a Ben Sisko show, and then maybe we'll talk.
I know. Yeah, and I don't even really want that. I guess we're done. Thanks everybody for listening.
You know what? Ben Sisko floating in the void for 10 episodes. I bet you could get him if you sold it to Avery Brooks. No, it's Ben. He's in the void. He's in there with the prophets, and it's just Ben Sisko thinking about existence for 10 hours.
Playing the piano.
Yeah.
That would get him there. Just quick final point before we go. Apparently the little sequence when Picard gets grabbed by Laris and they go through that square doorway of smoke at the very end is a reference to a TOS alien. So we'll see.
Oh, yeah. Do you know anything about that? That alien?
That alien...
I don't.
Is in the... I'm pretty sure that episode is the backdoor pilot that Roddenberry was trying to make while he was working on Star Trek. So... It's an episode where they go back in time to the 60s and they're walking around in basically another show that's going on.
I see.
And the alien is an alien pretending to be a human. He's called a supervisor. So, which is where they come from, the watches here with supervisors or whatever.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway, We'll see. At a certain point, the connections become something that makes me want to vomit like Guinan did in this episode. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next week with the next Picard. We will see you later.
It seems as if someone was watching over it. Before it was as if response was based on fact. Providing, deciding it was soon there. Square to it, face to it. was not there. Renewed its force as if it had a cause to live for. Denied it learned as if it had sooner been destroyed. Providing, deciding, it was soon there. Square to it, face to it, it was not there. Reviewed it thought as if someone were watching over it before it had sooner been denied. Renewed it seemed as if it had a cause to live for. Destroyed was later based on fact. Providing, deciding,